So all eyes will be on the South African Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee's announcement and its decision on the interest rate following a 25 basis point cut that we saw in September. The September cut was the first following 7 consecutive meetings, which took the interest rate to a 15-year peak of 8.25%. The Reserve Bank Governor Lesitsha Kganyago will this afternoon at 3 p.m. make this announcement. Let's now get an overview of what to expect from the rates decision and factors that are influencing these decisions with Patrick Buthelezi, who's an economist at Sanlam Investments. Patrick, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So some pundits are saying that at 25 basis points or 50 basis points, but if we look at the inflation rate that was announced yesterday by Stats SA at 2.8%, what are the chances of getting a 50% basis point?
Good morning, Adrian, and good morning to the viewers. I think with inflation numbers, they've been surprising on the downside for a number of months now. So 2.8 is below the floor of the inflation target. But still, I think the Reserve Bank will proceed cautiously. I think they will give us another 25 basis points. And the reason is this 2.8 will probably mark the low in the cycle. And moving forward, I think inflation, there are a lot of risks involved in moving forward. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them probably upgrading the inflation forecast just marginally higher for next year and even 2026. So for those reasons, so I think they will proceed very cautiously. And also what we have seen, if we look back in September, I think conditions were more favorable in September. We had the currency very strong at 17 Rand 30, and the currency is over 16 Rand as we speak. We also have this Eskom request of 36% electricity tariffs hanging over us, and that could raise inflation profile next year. So you're also dealing with those risks. But the forecast, our forecast, if I may say, so we expect inflation to remain nicely contained, and there's a nice buffer or scope for the Reserve Bank to continue to cut. But because of what they want to see inflation expectations moving towards 4.5, and inflation expectations still above that 4.5. And also know the governor that is advocating for lower inflation target, is advocating for lower inflation targets. So for those reasons, I think they will proceed cautiously.
Yeah, and also considering when we speak about geopolitics, the impact of that. Once again, we remember the impact that the war in Ukraine has had on food prices as well as fuel. Now that there seems to be growing tension and an escalation between Ukraine as well as Russia, is there a concern, perhaps maybe in the financial sector, that this could also lead to what we saw when the war started in 2022, where we've seen an increase in fuel prices, but also Russia later on reneging on the grain deal?
Yeah, I think this escalation raises the risk of what we observed in 2022 when we saw the fuel prices rising significantly, including food prices, given the fact that those two countries are big in terms of exporting wheat and maize products. So I think with the escalation in the war, and if it continues, I think those risks I think becomes even real, even in terms of fertilizers and chemicals and supply chains. So I think what this war is also doing, I think, is keeping those risks elevated, of which the Reserve Bank will clearly highlight those risks as the biggest concerns, because for them, unfortunately, if you decide on the policy, you are trying to influence the future, which is very uncertain, given a lot of things happening at the same time, or lot of moving parts happening at the same time. So the war, the escalation that we are observing is a great concern, because what it might result in, so it might result in, okay, so it might have an impact on economic growth, but also it might have an impact on inflation, so which is the bad combination, because you will have lower growth, but at the same time having high inflation, which means central banks, they will have to stop cutting interest rates. Or if the impact is worse on inflation, some central banks might be forced to even hike the interest rate.
Yeah, what impact would that have on the South African consumer, considering that at the same time as well, here in South Africa, we are dealing with a drought and farmers are obviously complaining that, listen, there hasn't been enough rain. We've seen now the rain has started, but the rain has come a bit late, and there's a possibility of lower yields than what was expected.
Yeah, I think for a South African consumer, okay, so for instance, looking at inflation, where inflation is, so I think that is providing a great relief for the consumer. We've seen the relief coming via fuel prices. We've seen, for instance, petrol and diesel decreasing for the past 5 months, I think since around June. And even food prices, as we speak, food prices remains around 2.8%. Meat prices remains very low. And with meat prices, the impact that we are seeing, like if you will remember last year, we had a couple of shocks in the meat industry, avian flu that resulted in egg prices increasing, also foot and mouth disease. Even this year, there are some provinces, I think around Eastern Cape and KZN. So in those provinces, they also detected the foot and mouth disease. But what they did is, so it resulted in other countries banning South African exports. So what that is doing in the short term, so because you cannot export meat, so which means output locally is higher, so which helps in a way to reduce meat prices, even though maize prices at this stage remains very, in fact, maize prices, especially the white maize, the price remains elevated because of the impact of El Nino that we saw early in the year, and even other African countries, especially in the SADC region, we have seen those countries suffering significantly. So for the consumer, so we're still having a lower inflation, which is helping, and fuel prices is helping. So that is why the currency remains very important. And also the Reserve Bank started cutting 25 basis points. And if they continue to cut by another 25 basis points, I think this is very significant, because you will remember the consumer, they owe about 2.18 trillion rands. So if you cut by 25 basis points and that cut remains for the next, say, 12 months, so the relief, it gives a relief of about 5.4 billion rands over the next 12 months, which is very significant. So if the Reserve Bank continues to cut and inflation is kept in check, so I think it should support the consumer. And we have seen retail expenditure, for instance, remaining positive, even though in September we saw retail sales increasing at a slower pace, but it has been a positive in recent months compared to what we saw at the beginning of the year. But overall, I think the consumer, what can only rescue the consumer is if the economy is growing, because the problem is with the economy not growing enough, so the little that people have, you have to share with others, because there are few of people employed. So income has to stretch very fast. So the only rescue in this regard is for the economy to grow much faster.
Yeah. Just a quick final one. Eskom is applying for a plus 50% tariff increase over the next 3 years. The MPC has expressed itself before on the problem around administered prices. especially electricity as well, and the impact that that has on the economy. Do you think that the Reserve Bank, the MPC this time around, could make such a reflection as well, and perhaps maybe even forecast what such an impact, what such an increase would have on the economy?
Yeah, I think they will reflect on it, because I think in the previous MPC, I think the projections they were working with for next year, July, I think it's about 10%, and the request is way higher than that. Obviously, NERSA may grant them probably not what they are requesting, but probably higher than what the Reserve Bank has in their forecasts. I think they will probably reflect on the impact, or they might even adjust. Their electricity tariffs higher, of which, if they do that, their inflation forecast may have to increase slightly. So, which also, in a way, will speak to them having to be cautious about cutting rates moving forward.
Yeah. Patrick, thank you so much for your time. Patrick Buthelezi is an economist with Sanlam Investment. As we look ahead to the MPC's announcement that will be made around 3 o'clock later on this afternoon, and stay tuned to Channel 405. We'll bring you that announcement from the Reserve Bank Governor live.